The future is bright. The Minnesota Wild have been a regular season team that makes the playoffs, but is eliminated in the first round, only to get a mid draft pick and continue this process year after year. The Wild have made it past the first round three times in their existence and have made it past the second round one time in 2003. However, that is all going to change. It's a chain of events that have already started that I believe are going to lead the Wild to having the best team in franchise history in the next few years. As well, I believe the Wild will finally make deep playoff runs that the fan base has desperately wanted. The future is bright for this team. But before we discuss the future, I want to take a little bit of a look at the past. And we will start here. Chuck Fletcher was the general manager of the Minnesota Wild from 2009, May 21st, 2009, until April 23rd, 2018. Under Fletcher, the Wild traded away draft picks at the deadline, mostly for underwhelming returns. And when the Wild did draft, there was a lot of busts that just did not turn out into NHLers or were ended up being traded away. Fletcher was able to turn the Wild into a playoff team, but was unable to get the Wild past the second round under his leadership. Looking at the future for the Wild, there's three really important players that Fletcher is responsible for drafting, and I wanted to discuss them. Starting with Kirill Kaprizov, he was drafted 135th overall in the fifth round of the 2015 draft and is the face of the franchise. He is the best player to ever wear a Wild jersey. Kirill the Thrill or Dollar Dollar Bill Kirill, whatever you call him, he is the superstar of this Wild franchise. Kaprizov is 26 years old. He is signed for three more seasons until 2025, 2026. Fletcher drafted Kaprizov, but was unable to sign him and bring him over to Minnesota. We'll get a little bit into that more later. Joel Erikssonek, drafted 20th overall in the 2015 draft, and has become a big part of this Wild team with his two-way ability. He shuts down opponents' top players, and is overall a pain in the ass to play against. Eck is 26. He is signed until 2028, 2029 for this Wild team. And last but not least, Jonas Brodin, drafted 10th overall in the 2011 draft. Brodin, in my opinion, is one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL. With his speed and his passing ability, he's able to cover up his deep hair mistakes. Cough, cough, Matt Dumba. But when Matt Dumba did make mistakes, Jonas Brodin was able to cover up those a lot of the time. Brodin is 30 years old, and he is signed until 2027, 2028 for this Wild team. After Chuck Fletcher was let go, Paul Fenton was hired as the new general manager on May 21st, 2018, just under a month after Fletcher was fired. The 2018 draft happened on June 22nd, so Fenton was only on the job for about a month before his first draft. And the 2018 draft was a lot like former previous Wild drafts in players ultimately being busts or not playing for the Wild franchise. Connor Dewar was the lone exception, drafted 92nd overall in the third round. He's the only player from that draft that is currently on the Wild roster. Um, and he is currently a fourth line player, and but still has an important part in this team, especially on the penalty kill. Fenton made one big trade for the Minnesota Wild, which was trading Mikael Granlund to Nashville for Kevin Fiala. Granlund never looked like the same player that he was in Minnesota after leaving, and is now currently heading to the San Jose Sharks. after a trade from Pittsburgh. But we'll discuss a little bit more about Kevin Fiala later. In the 2019 draft, Fenton drafted Matt Boldy, who has become an integral part of the Wild's future as their current second line left wing. Boldy's a highly skilled winger with impressive creativity, a quick release, and good playmaking ability. He's already shown his ability to score. When Kaprizov got injured, Matt Boldy carried this team on his back. Bill Guerin signed him to a 7-year contract. So he's with Minnesota until 2029, 2030. Matt Boldy will be a big part of this Wild franchise. Second in the 2019 draft was Hunter Jones, who has spent most of his time in Iowa so far with the Iowa Wild. Jones currently would be the fourth goalie in the Wild system, obviously with Marc-Andre Fleury, Philip Gustafson, and Jesper Wallstedt, who we'll discuss later. Hunter Jones is the fourth guy there, but when it comes to goalies, you never know how they're going to develop. You never know what they're going to turn into. Hunter Jones, drafted in the second round, has potential, and we'll see how he develops over the next couple of seasons. The third player in the 2019 draft taken was Adam Beckman. Beckman led the WHL in points in 2019-2020 with 107 points in 63 games played. He had 48 goals and 59 assists. Over his last two seasons in Iowa, he increased his point total from 34 to 36 points while playing 15 fewer games this past season. Had a little bit of a cup of coffee in the NHL, but nothing long term. And he'll be pushing to try to make this Wild roster this upcoming season. Fenton was fired on July 30th, 2019, for behind the scenes stuff, which included rumors of mistreating employees and other stuff that we just won't get to on this show. But he was let go in just under 1 month after Fenton was fired. The Wild organization was changed forever. And on August 21st, 2019, Craig Leopold, the Wild owner, hired Bill Guerin to become the next general manager of the Minnesota Wild. A hiring that I believe really changed the whole direction of the franchise. And when the title of the video is the future is bright, Bill Guerin is a huge reason why the future is bright. Guerin took some time to watch over the Wild organization in his early time with the team to see what needed to be changed. Ultimately, Guerin felt the locker room had issues that needed to be addressed, and he also felt that the Wild's prospect pool was extremely weak and needed to be built up. On July 9th, 2020, Guerin hired Judd Brackett to be the director of amateur scouting and to build up the Wild's prospect pool. Brackett had already built up a reputation with the Canucks at being um, a very good scout with a great ability to draft well and find good prospects. Guerin's first move for the Wild, his first big trade, was on February 10th, 2020. Guerin made the decision to trade Jason Zucker to Pittsburgh for Alex Galchenyuk, Kalen Addison, and a first round pick. Galchenyuk played 14 games with Minnesota. He had 7 points in 14 games. He's bounced around to 4 other teams since then, but he was a minor part of the trade, basically to make the money work. He came over and played 14 games with the Wild. Kalen Addison included in this trade. Bill Guerin obviously worked for Pittsburgh, so he had knowledge about Kalen Addison while working for the organization. Addison quarterbacked the power play last season, but defensive issues held him out of the lineup. Addison has the offensive skills to be a power play quarterback and to potentially be a top 4 defenseman. All he needs to do is work out those defensive issues. And if he can do that, this trade is a win for Minnesota right off the bat, just with Kalen Addison. Lastly, in the trade was a first round pick. There was a condition in this trade. Pittsburgh, if their 2020 first round pick was between the first and the 15th overall pick, then Pittsburgh had 7 days to decide if they wanted to keep that pick, or they could give the Wild their 2021 pick with no protection. Pittsburgh, the pick was 15th overall, so they decided to keep that pick, which they ended up trading away anyways to Toronto, who drafted Rodion Amirov, who sadly just recently passed away to cancer. Rest in peace. Um, but this meant Minnesota would get Pittsburgh's 2021 pick with no protection. It ended up being the 26th overall pick, which the Wild used to select Carson Lambos. And of course, we'll have more on him later. The next big thing that Guerin had to do, that Guerin realized had to be done when he came and joined this franchise, is to sign Kirill Kaprizov, which Paul Fenton and Chuck Fletcher were unable to do. Fletcher did make a trip to Russia in early 2018 to meet with Kaprizov. Apparently, he had tried earlier, but was only able to talk to Kaprizov's old agent and Kaprizov's girlfriend, as the Russian national team would not allow Fletcher to talk to Kaprizov during that time. The Wild had invited Kaprizov to development camps, and the Wild were under the impression that Kaprizov understood that once he fulfilled his final year in the KHL season, that the Wild would sign him and Kaprizov would come over in 2018, 2019. However, Kaprizov signed a 2-year extension in the KHL, and he was quoted in an interview saying, of course, there was translation here, but they, being Minnesota, weren't too interested in me. What round was I picked at? The fifth? I think they forgot about me immediately after the selection. Only when I made it to the World Championships, they started to do something and started talking with my agent. We all seen the job the Maple Leafs did with Nikita Zaitsev. There was nothing like that with me. I want to play in the NHL, just not now, but a bit later. At first, I need to play well here to be more confident. Sometimes I don't play well even here in the KHL. Guerin, of course, coming over and taking over for the Minnesota Wild, as I said, realized that signing Kaprizov was crucial to this Wild's future. Guerin made Kaprizov feel wanted. He made multiple trips to Russia, kept in contact with Kaprizov. And finally, Kaprizov signed his entry level deal, which ended up being a 2-year deal. The first year was burned um, in that 20, 20, 2021 playoffs, which was a COVID shortened year. So the 2020 year, but he had 2 seasons before needing to be re-signed. Guerin then signed him to a 5-year deal, which expires after the 2025-2026 season. So he has 3 more years to go. And we finally get to the first draft that was done by Bill Guerin and Judd Brackett. Of course, this was done by video conference call. This was during the COVID times. So the draft lottery was changed. It was a 2-part draft lottery. Minnesota ended up having a 12.5% chance of winning the lottery. They were one of the teams in the qualifying round, and the qualifying round was the one that won the draft lottery. The New York Rangers ended up winning the draft lottery. The Wild got the 9th overall pick. And in the draft, the Wild were happily shocked when Marco Rossi fell to 9th overall, and the Wild were able to draft him. Rossi led the OHL in points in 2019-2020. He had 129 points in 56 games played, which was 13 more points than the next closest player, who happened to be Cole Perfetti, who was drafted 10th overall, right behind Marco Rossi. Rossi scored 53 points in 63 games in his first AHL season. He followed that up with 51 points in 53 games played last year. Rossi's played in a total of 21 NHL games. He's 1 assist over that span, However, he wasn't given much of an opportunity in the NHL, landing on the third and fourth line. This is a big season for Rossi to prove that he's not a bust and that he has the offensive ability to make him a top six center, potentially a top line center. Rossi did develop carditis after contracting COVID-19, which was a really scary time for him and potentially almost had tragic results. However, he was able to beat it and recover, but that put his development back behind others in his draft year. I expect him to take the next step this year, and I expect him to become a full-time NHLer. I really have um, high expect or not expectations. I shouldn't say expectations, but uh, I really feel high about Marco Rossi and his future as an NHL player. Second in the 2020 draft, 37th overall, was Marat Kuznetsov. Marat is described as a high energy playmaker who makes things happen whenever he steps on the ice. He's a responsible two-way center, um, slightly undersized, but that doesn't shy him away from hitting guys. He has good leadership abilities. He increased his point total in the KHL last year, scoring 41 points in 63 games. He's projected to be a top six center and could make the jump right from the KHL to Minnesota in 2024 2025. Like a few other prospects we're going to talk about, their projection is to make it in 2024 2025. So one more year before we see a few prospects potentially make this team. Two picks after Kusadonov, 39th overall, the Wild selected Ryan O'Rourke. He's described as being a mean, nasty, and violent player when he is the puck. He is a stay at home defender. He is a very high battle level. He never takes time off and never takes a shift off. He's capable of moving the puck, good decisions with the puck, and he has a lethal slap shot. However, when he made his jump to Iowa, we did not see that slap shot last season. 67 games, he had 9 assists, 0 goals. So the offense wasn't there at least last year, but he could be a very good defensive defenseman, potentially third pair defenseman for this team. Damon Hunt was taken in the third round from Minnesota. He's described as one that explodes in his first two steps. He's his best assets is his skating. He closes gaps early, uses backwards mobility to match attacker speed. He does have an element of physicality, which also um, goes well with the speed and being a good defenseman. In the fifth round, 146 overall, Minnesota selected Pavel Novak, who's described as being a deceptive power play threat with look-off passes. He's not much of a shooter 5-on-5. He's much more of a creative playmaker 5-on-5. He increased his point total from 58 points in 55 games in 2019-2020 to 72 points in 62 games played last in 2021-2022. He missed last season after recovering from Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was declared cancer-free in October. Didn't make the Wild development camp due to a lower body injury, but he intends to turn pro in Iowa this upcoming season and potentially try to make the Minnesota Wild roster in the upcoming years. Pavel Novak beating cancer. I wish him nothing but the best in his future with the Minnesota Wild or in the NHL specifically. Next up, in the 2020-2021 season, there was a shortened 56-game season with a temporary realignment that had Minnesota going to the West Division. And this was for the first season in a long time without Mikko Koivu in the lineup. He was not extended by Bill Guerin. Koivu went to Columbus, played 7 games before retiring. Minnesota finished third in the West Division, which is the division they were in for that season. before being eliminated in 7 games to the Vegas Golden Knights. But at this time, the relationship between the Wild and Zach Parise and Ryan Suter was already fracturing. Parise was a healthy scratch for regular season games and to start off the playoff series as well. Fletcher originally had signed Parise and Suter to matching 13-year deals, and both would be, had they not been bought out, both would have been still been signed for the upcoming season as well as next year as well. But there were signs that something could happen with Parise, whether it be a trade or a buyout, but nobody saw it coming. On July 13th, 2021, it was announced that the Wild would be buying out not only Zach Parise, but also Ryan Suter, the remainder of both of their contracts. This decision still affects the Wild to this day. As for the upcoming season, this year as well as next year, the Wild will have $14,743,588, so almost 15 million less cap space than every other NHL team due to the buyouts. And then after that, the Wild will have 1.6 million less cap for 4 years after that. So of course that won't be as bad, but this almost 15 million less cap space has made it very difficult for the Wild in the recent years. But you may be wondering, why did Bill Guerin make the decision to buy these guys out? Parise played for the Islanders last season, had a bit of a bounce back since bounce back a few seasons since signing with the Islanders. Suter signed a deal with the Dallas Stars and is currently projected to be on their top pair next year. So you may be wondering, why did Bill Guerin make this decision? It's been said from multiple sources that Parise and Suter were both negative um, pieces of the locker room. Suter was very unhappy that his good friend Parise was scratched in the playoff series. Suter voiced his frustration with Wild owner Craig Leopold, who is friends with Ryan Suter, which made things a little bit more complicated. Jason Arnott, who played for the Nashville Predators, a respected player, played with Suter in Nashville and had some very negative things to say about Suter in a radio interview, saying Suter, all he did was complain about his ice time and how much other people were getting paid. And this is when Suter was a rookie. Arnott said he also heard that Suter was a distraction in the Wild locker room and to the Wild team. Suter and Parise both lived in Edina and insisted that the Wild travel there to practice away from St. Paul to an arena that was closer to where Parise and Suter lived. Young Wild players were afraid to speak up in the locker room as Parise and Suter ran the locker room through the Fletcher years. When Parise and Suter signed their 13-year deals, they basically felt like they were going to be running this team. Suter would get statistics in between periods to check on his ice time to make sure it was high enough. Suter was called uncoachable by a former Wild coach. In the end, Bill Guerin decided that the Wild needed to go into cap hell and to get rid of Parise and Suter. They needed to be uh, shown the door. They needed to be shown the door, which they were. Guerin had to get approval from Craig Leopold to do this move. Leopold supported Guerin's decision. And Guerin is not the type of person to tolerate Suter's attitude and locker room presence. The culture needed to be changed, and Guerin did that. Putting the Wild in cap held his last few years has prevented them from spending a lot of money on free agents last year, this year, but it could be a blessing in disguise as the future and the Wild the next couple of years are going to have a ton of cap space in 2025, 2026 as the cap increases and the buyout penalties decrease by over 13 million. The 2021 draft was up next. The second draft with Guerin and Judd Brackett. And thanks to the Zucker trade, they had 2 first rounders in this draft. The Wild were supposed to draft 22nd overall and 26th overall. However, Guerin made a trade with the Edmonton Oilers, sending the 22nd overall and the 90th overall pick, a third round pick, to Edmonton to move up two spots to the 20th overall pick. And the Wild obviously had their eye on a certain player, and that player was Jesper Wallstedt, who was named the number one goalie prospect on the planet by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic in 2022. And he's currently still the number one goalie prospect in the world. We'll get to more about Wallstedt later. However, this move combined with what Guerin has done before really had me getting excited about the Wild's future. With the 26th overall pick, the Wild selected their second first round pick, Carson Lambos. Lambos is described as being a potent shooter with skill to manipulate defenders and improve his shooting location. With or without the puck, he's a passing option and a scoring threat. He faces shots and passes, waits for defenders to commit, and then bursts into the space that he created. Constant head fakes, leading to another layer of deception. Lambos is projected to be a top four defenseman with a top pairing upside. So he could potentially be a top pairing defenseman in the future years. When you look at the Wild's defensive prospects, if you don't include Kalen Addison, who's already played with Minnesota, and Brock Faber, who joined the Wild in the end of last season, Lambos is the top defensive prospect remaining. He will try to impress in training camp. Most likely, he'll find himself in Iowa with the AHL this season and potentially make it next year. Or he could find himself back in the AHL as well. Or sorry, in the WHL. Next up was Jack Pert, who was taken in the second round. He's described as being an excellent skater, being mobile, isn't afraid to check guys. He's a very refined game that gives him the potential to also be a top four defenseman. Pert, hometown Minnesota boy, and that's become a pattern for Bill Guerin in drafting Minnesota-born players. That could be a coincidence, potentially hoping for some hometown discounts in the future. We'll have to see, but Guerin has been drafting more Minnesota-born players recently. Bankier, Caden Bankier was taken in the third round. He's described as being a strong power forward with great size, which could be very beneficial at the NHL level. Very good at battling on the boards, and he's a good playmaker and good passer. He's coming off his fourth season in the WHL, which was a breakout season for him. He played in 57 games. He had 37 goals and 48 assists for a total of 85 points in those 57 games, having a breakout season last year. Kyle Masters, finally taken in the fourth round. He's described as being a puck-moving defenseman that has strong skating, offensive, defensive sides of the puck. He has great vision. He activates into the rush by filling space on the weak side or becoming a forward. In every situation, he sprints past his opponent, establishing body positioning if necessary, and adjusts his route and speed to become a passing option if necessary. Masters' potential has risen over the last year. In 2021 2022, he had a total of 14 points in 65 games. However, last year, Masters scored 65 points in 66 games, so almost a point per game player. A huge breakout year for him as well. And Guerin, in his two NHL drafts that we've gone over already, has added a ton of prospects to the Wild prospect pool. Moving on to the next part here is the Fiala trade. On June 29th, 2022, Guerin made a decision that he had to make. Due to the buyouts of Parise and Suter, tough decisions had to be made, and this one was one of them. This trade has divided the Wild franchise. Los Angeles has been considered as the winners of this trade due to the large part of Fiala finishing second on the LA Kings in scoring with 72 points in 69 games played last season. However, Minnesota and getting Brock Faber got their hometown kid, who is seen in this picture here on the screen, celebrating a Kaprizov goal against the Colorado Avalanche. Brock Faber at this time had no idea that in the future he would end up getting traded to his favorite team and his hometown team. Minnesota also got Los Angeles' first round pick in 2022, which they used to select Liam Ogren. We'll discuss him here shortly. And this trade once again gave Minnesota multiple first round picks in the first round. In the short term, Los Angeles has won this trade. However, Faber showed very quickly in his short appearance with the Wild he's ready for the NHL next season. We'll discuss Ogren here now. Liam Ogren was the first pick for the Minnesota Wild in the 2022 NHL draft, 19th overall. He's described as being a puck mover. He gets the puck moving as he arrives. At the position, he plays a very heightened pace. The puck is on and off his skill, stick instantly. He's a play driving winger with a nose for the scoring areas. He's a safe bet to become a top nine winger with the potential to be even more than a top nine winger. Next, the Wild took Danila Yurov with their second pick, 24th overall. Yurov is described as having plus level skating and having a well maintained mental map of the ice, constantly scanning the ice. He's willing to play the body, and he's a nuisance on offensive zone retrievals, unrelenting in his pursuit. He works every bit as hard as he is smart. Kaprizov texted Yurov and told him he's waiting for Yurov to get here to Minnesota. Yurov, a big fan of Kaprizov's, could potentially be his line mate when Zuccarello's contract expires after this season. Both Liam Ogren and Danila Yurov have both said they intend on trying to make the Wild roster next season in 2024, 2025. So a year from now, they both intend on trying to make the Wild roster. Hunter Haight was drafted in the second round by the Wild. He's being described as being his best asset, his puck skills. You'll see him using handling ability that's unexpected and creative ways to get around opponents, outmaneuvering them. He's projected to have top nine potential to be a top nine forward. And finally, David Spacek was drafted in the fifth round by the Wild. He is said to be a strong two-way defenseman. He can put up points, but he can also be a shutdown defender and has potential to be a top four defenseman for the Wild one day. After the 2022 draft, we have the Talbot trade. 5 days after the draft, Bill Guerin decided to trade Cam Talbot to Ottawa for Philip Gustafson. In the previous year, in the 2021-22 playoffs, Dean Evison chose to start Marc-Andre Fleury in the playoffs instead of Cam Talbot. When you look at it, Cam Talbot had allowed 4 or more goals in 6 of his previous 9 games leading up to the trade that brought Marc-Andre Fleury to Minnesota. So obviously there was worries about goaltending and that Fleury needed to be brought in, which kind of showed what was going to happen in the future. But Talbot played much better down the stretch after Fleury had been acquired. Fleury would go 2-3 in the playoffs before Cam Talbot came in for Game 6, which was a 5-1 loss. Things escalated when Cam Talbot's agent said that Guerin had a lot to think about. And Guerin said, I quote, "I don't have shit to do. Cam Talbot's under contract. George can say whatever the hell he wants. My team's set right now, and that's the way it goes. We can all have discussions all we want. Cam's a member of our team. We really like Cam, and we're trying to do is win." Fleury was then re-signed to a 2-year deal, um, which and Cam Talbot was traded to Ottawa for Philip Gustafson. Talbot would go 32, 17, and 14 with an 898 save percentage and a 2.93 goals against average, which were steps back from both his previous two seasons in Minnesota. Gustafson, on the other hand, had a breakout season, going 23, 10, and 13. Or sorry, and he was 23, 10, and 13 with Ottawa with a 905 save percentage and a 3.12 goals against average. But after coming to Minnesota, he improved to 37, 22, and 9, 931 save percentage, and a 2.1 goals against average last year for the Wild. Once again, Guerin made an impact trade that has worked out well for Minnesota. Next up, we have the most recent draft, the 2023 draft, which just recently happened. And a lot of the Wild fan base were pretty upset in this draft with decisions that were made. People said that Charlie Stramel was a bit of a reach, and people were just upset um, with this draft. However, Guerin and Brackett decided in this draft to make sure that their issue with centers that has plagued Minnesota pretty much their entire existence had a good chance of being over after this draft. The Wild already have some small, skilled centers in the pipeline, but they needed big centers. So Bill Guerin and Judd Brackett addressed this, starting with Charlie Stramel. They took him 21st overall. He's being described as a power forward with great size and strength who can play a skilled game. He needs to add some quickness to his game, but he has a shooting ability and offensive IQ to succeed. To succeed at the next level, he projects to be around a third line center in the future. Rasmus Kumpulainen was taken in the second round, 53rd overall. He's described as being a big bodied two-way center. There's more skill that meets the eye, and he can be physical when necessary. So we have two big physical centers added in Stramel and Kumpalainen. But with the third pick, Minnesota chose Riley Heidt. This is someone that everyone is very excited about the Wild drafting, and that he fell to 64th overall. He's small. He's a smaller center, being 5'11", but he has a ton of offensive upside, being described as being a creative and intelligent playmaker who has a strong work ethic, great speed, and overall mobility. He projects to be a top six offensive center at the NHL level. And finally, in the fourth round, Minnesota drafted Aaron Pionk, whose brother Neil plays for Winnipeg. Pionk is described as being a very capable defenseman and potentially could make the Wild roster in the future. Here are the future faces of the franchise. Left wingers, centers, right wingers, defensemen. These are guys that have yet to play for the Wild. Adam Beckman, Marco Rossi, both have had a cup of coffee in the NHL, but have not actually had big roles. This is the future for the Wild franchise. As we can see, they have a lot of centers now. They have defensemen, two left wingers, two right wingers. Potentially, they could add some more wingers, but the Wild have addressed their center depth issue that they've had for so long, and they have quite a few defensemen coming with a lot of high potential as well. But to finish off the show, no better way to finish off the show than talking about the Wild's number one prospect, and that is Jesper the Wall Wallstedt. I insist on his nickname being the Wall, and I'm going to continue saying it until it happens. It's a perfect nickname for him. He got off to a bit of a slow start in the AHL last season. Finished the season 18, 15, and 5 with a 908 save percentage, 2.68 goals against, which was his first season in North America on North American ice. Last month, The Athletic released their top 10 goalie prospects. Wallstedt was ranked number one He is still the number one goalie prospect in the world. He's described as being a strong, fluid skater in the crease. He doesn't mind coming out to challenge upcoming threats. He tracks the puck very well. He doesn't get rattled when he makes a mistake, which is absolutely something huge you want in a goaltender. And he has an evenly distributed ability to stop the puck with his hands. Um, Gustafson just recently being re-signed to a 3-year deal at 3.75 million for 3 years. Means there won't be any reason to rush Jesper Wallstedt. Fleury's on the contract on the books for 1 more year as well. Guerin is smart. He's not going to rush his future netminder here. Guerin himself recently promoted to president of hockey operations, as well as his job of GM, and was given a multi-year extension. And after watching this video, it should be clear why Craig Leopold made this decision with Bill Guerin. The future is bright for this team, and Bill Guerin is a huge reason for this. Get excited! Get excited, Wild fans! The future is bright. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks a lot for watching.